Welcome. Today we're going to talk about used screens. Common things, especially among beginners. I found a great deal on a bunch of used screens. Is it a great deal, or is it stealing your profits? First thing we're going to look at, if the screens are relatively new, then yes, it can be a very good deal. A lot of people that are transitioning in and out of screen printing, or they're going to an automatic and they've got frames and they're less than a year old. But if they're older frames, just because, like this frame, because they don't have any holes in them or any rips in them, we assume that they are a good screen. Screens with time will lose tension. Lower tension will actually cost you money. Lower production rates, decreased opacity, and actually increased print defects, all from lower tension. How? We'll go into the top 3 problems associated with lower tension. Did you know that there are recommended tension levels from the mesh manufacturers for different mesh counts? There's actually a low and a high. High doesn't tend to be a problem because you'll notice that if you do go too high, the mesh will either pop during the stretching methodology or it will pop shortly afterwards because it won't have enough give. But low tension is a common problem among screen printing. And there, the first problem that we run in with low tension is the mesh openings actually shrink. Every mesh is going to tell you a percentage of open area, and that's based at their recommended mesh tension. When the mesh tension drops, the openings shrink. When the openings shrink, it's actually harder for us to get ink to go through the screen. And what do we struggle with? We struggle with opacity. We struggle with rough print surfaces, all because of low tension on there. We also lose what they call shear. As the squeegee's traveling, the mesh is not pushing back up. The mesh is actually, instead of creating a V as the squeegee travels, the mesh drops down and creates a nice soft J, and it doesn't give you a good shear. Once again, causing you problems with opacity. So top 3 problems from low tension. First is that the mesh openings actually shrink. They get smaller, ink more easily gets trapped inside of those. Decreased opacity, rough edges, and uneven print surfaces all are common problems caused by low tension on the mesh, by the mesh openings shrinking. So number 2, as the tension continues to drop, the next thing that we're going to have is going to be the mesh flexes. As the mesh flexes, we get a uneven print surface. So we can have varying opacity. We can have poor ink shear because the mesh is not pushing back up. So the ink is not able to clean the screen. Third problem, if the mesh tension continues to decline, is going to be actually the floating. The mesh begins to move with our squeegee as we're pressing. And as that happens, we have variances in our registration because the mesh is stretching different amounts as we are printing. We can get also blurry edges to our prints. And if we're trying to print wet on wet, we can find after just a dozen or so prints that the buildup on the back of the screen starts to become very muddy because our image is not falling in the same place. 3 ways low tension can cost you money. You notice most of these problems are very common problems that most screen printers experience at some time or another. General rule of thumb is going to be 20 to 30 newtons depending on the mesh count. Your coarser meshes a lot of times can go a little higher. Your 230, 305s, they tend to drop down to 25 unless you're using specialized mesh. But if you don't have a tension meter, when you push on the mesh should not flex as in such. Here we have a screen that we just used to print the Michael Myers, and as we press, it pushes back, and when you thump it, it should be like a snare drum. If it's doing that, you're generally good. This screen is, my opinion, is no longer printable. It's time to send it off to get it restretched. Screen printers, no, and it is not an arguable fact or theory. Tension plays a major role in getting sharp edge definition, good opacity, smooth prints. Tension is a major variable that the more you control it, the more consistently, the easier you'll print, less problems, less headaches, less errors. Happy printing, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give us a like or a share. Take care.